The fluorescent lights of Mercy General flickered as Henry leaned toward Dr. Felix. His voice low but steady, like a man ordering dinner, not a death. "Doctor, my wife must die in the labor room today. I will pay you $250,000 for the job." The doctor's eyes slid from Henry's face to the thick envelope in his hand, then back again, a slow smile pulling at the corners of his mouth like a curtain being drawn. "All right, sir," Dr. Felix said calmly. "Just give me 20 minutes. I'll send the nurses away. The job will be done soon." As Henry stepped back into the hallway, he muttered with bitter satisfaction, "I can't wait to get rid of this fat fool and marry another girl." Behind the closed door, Regina lay twisted in pain, sweat soaking the sheets beneath her trembling body. Her fingers clawed weakly at the bed rails as another wave of labor tore through her. And in between screams, she whispered to the child fighting its way into the world, "Don't worry, my baby. Daddy is here. He will pay for the operation. We will be fine." She smiled through tears, clinging to that fragile hope, not knowing that danger had already slipped into the room wearing a white coat and a smile. But the story of how Regina ended up bleeding on that narrow bed did not begin in that hospital. It began with love that wore a mask. When Regina first met Henry, he was gentle, the kind of man who opened doors, sent good morning texts, and spoke about forever like it was something he could hold in his hands. He called her my queen, promised her a home filled with laughter, and when he asked her to marry him, she believed God had finally answered her prayers. Yet, just months after the wedding, the man who once kissed her forehead now looked at her with cold disgust. When pregnancy rounded her belly and softened her waist, Henry sneered that she was no longer beautiful, no longer hot, no longer worth the love he once pretended to give. He complained to his father about wanting another wife, and when his father refused, the sweetness in Henry curdled into cruelty. He beat Regina like she was a stranger who owed him money, slapping her, kicking her pregnant stomach, dragging her across the floor, even bringing other women home and sleeping with them where she could hear every sound. Regina cried quietly, trapped between fear and shame, until the night Henry smashed her head against the wall and tried to strangle her breath away. She fled to her parents, bruised and shaking, but they sent her back with words sharper than his fists. A woman must endure, so she returned, stopped going for antenatal care, and waited each night for the sound of his drunken footsteps. Then labor came suddenly on the street, pain slicing through her like fire, and strangers rushed her to the hospital where she begged for help she could not afford. 6 hours she screamed, 6 hours the baby fought inside her, until Henry finally appeared, not as a savior, but as the man who had come to sign her death sentence. And now, as Regina breathed through another contraction, believing love had finally shown up for her, fate stood just outside her door, counting 20 minutes. The clock above the delivery room door ticked louder than Regina's cries, each second dropping like a stone into the pit of her fear. Dr. Felix moved with slow, deliberate steps, dismissing the nurses one after another with fake urgency. "I'll handle this alone," he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed, as though he had done this many times before. When the room was finally empty, he turned toward Regina with a face that held no mercy, only calculation. Regina reached out weakly, her fingers trembling. "Doctor, please, save my baby," she whispered, her lips pale, her eyes heavy with pain and trust. Dr. Felix adjusted his gloves and forced a gentle smile. "Just relax, Mrs. Brown. Everything will be over soon." Those words should have brought comfort, but instead they carried the weight of a grave. Outside, Henry leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone like a man waiting for food to be served, not a woman's life to be erased. He imagined his future. No more swollen belly, no more cries, no more responsibility. Just freedom and another girl on his arm. Inside the room, Regina gasped as another contraction ripped through her, her body arching, her voice breaking, and still she believed help was finally near. As Regina drifted in and out of consciousness, memories flooded her mind like the last flicker of a dying flame. She remembered the early days with Henry, when he used to hold her hand in public, when his laughter filled rooms instead of his anger. She remembered the names he called her later, the nights she slept on the floor, the way she learned to cry without making a sound. And now, lying there alone, she wondered if this was how all her suffering would end. Quietly, without justice, without even a goodbye. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a young nurse named Tasha peeked in, her brows knitting in confusion when she saw Dr. Felix alone. "Doctor, I thought you said—" she began, but he cut her off sharply. "I said I'll handle it. Leave." Tasha hesitated, her eyes shifting to Regina's weak, pleading face, something unsettling stirring in her chest. But she obeyed and stepped back into the hallway. Regina watched the door close and felt a cold fear crawl into her bones. For the first time since labor began, she was not afraid of the pain. She was afraid she might not survive it. Tasha stood in the hallway with her back against the wall, her heart refusing to slow down. Something about the way Dr. Felix had dismissed her felt wrong, dangerously wrong. She had worked under him for 2 years and had never seen him send everyone away like that, especially not with a patient in such critical condition. The screams coming from Regina's room pierced through her chest like invisible needles, each cry sounding less like labor and more like a desperate call for help. Tasha pressed her palms together, whispering a short prayer under her breath. "God, please don't let me ignore what you're showing me." She walked quietly toward the door and placed her ear against it, her breath catching when she heard Dr. Felix's cold voice telling Regina to stay still, while the woman pleaded weakly for her baby. Tasha's stomach twisted. This was not right. This was not how a doctor spoke to a woman fighting for her life. Meanwhile, Henry sat in the waiting area, crossing and uncrossing his legs, irritation growing on his face like a rash. He had expected everything to be over by now. He checked his watch and muttered, "What's taking so long?" just as Tasha walked past him in a hurry. Their eyes met briefly, and something in her look made him shift uncomfortably. Inside Regina's room, Dr. Felix reached for a syringe filled with a clear liquid, his movements steady and practiced. Regina's eyes fluttered open just in time to see the needle glint under the light. "Doctor, what is that?" she whispered, fear finally breaking through her trust. Dr. Felix paused for half a second, then replied flatly, "It's to help you sleep. You've suffered enough." Regina tried to shake her head, but her body was too weak, too heavy. Outside the door, Tasha pushed it open suddenly, her voice sharp and trembling. "Doctor, stop! What are you doing?" The syringe froze midair, and in that moment, the room held its breath, as if fate itself had paused to decide whose side it was on. Dr. Felix turned slowly toward Tasha, his eyes darkening like a storm rolling in without warning. "You should not be here," he said, his voice low and dangerous, the kind that carried both authority and threat. Tasha stood frozen for a heartbeat, then gathered every ounce of courage she had left. "This patient needs surgery, not whatever that is," she said, pointing at the syringe with a shaking finger. Regina watched them with blurred vision, her heart pounding harder than the contractions, sensing for the first time that something terrible was truly unfolding around her. Dr. Felix scoffed, setting the syringe down with deliberate calm. "You're just a nurse. You don't understand complicated cases," he replied, stepping closer to Tasha. But she did not move back. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, "I understand enough to know when a life is being put in danger, and I won't let that happen." Her words cut through the room like a blade, and for a moment, the doctor's confidence cracked, just enough to reveal the fear underneath. Outside, Henry rose from his seat, his patience finally snapping. He stormed toward the delivery room just as raised voices drifted into the hallway. Pushing the door open, he saw Tasha standing protectively beside Regina, and Dr. Felix glaring like a man whose secret was about to spill. "What is going on here?" Henry demanded, his eyes darting between them. Dr. Felix spoke quickly. "She is interfering with treatment." Tasha turned to Henry, her eyes burning. "Sir, your wife needs immediate surgery. Delaying or doing anything else could kill her and the baby." Henry's jaw tightened, anger flashing across his face. Not the fear of losing his wife, but the rage of a plan being threatened. "Doctor, handle your staff," he snapped. "I gave you clear instructions." Regina heard those words like thunder in her ears. She slowly turned her head toward Henry, her voice barely more than a breath. "What? Instructions?" The room fell silent, and in that silence, the truth stood trembling, waiting to be spoken aloud. Henry's face stiffened, his lips parting slightly as if he had not expected Regina to still have enough strength to speak. For a brief second, his eyes flickered with something close to panic, but it vanished quickly, replaced by cold irritation. Dr. Felix cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the moment. "Mrs. Brown, you're in no condition to be asking questions. Please focus on your breathing," he said, waving his hand dismissively. But Regina's eyes were locked on Henry now, wide and searching, filled with a painful mix of love and fear. "Henry, why would the doctor say that? What did you tell him?" she whispered. Tasha watched the exchange with growing dread, her heart sinking as pieces began to fall into place. The truth was too ugly to remain hidden much longer, and it pressed against the walls of that room like a scream trapped in a chest. Henry exhaled sharply, his patience breaking like thin glass. "You ask too many questions," he snapped, stepping closer to the bed. "Just do what the doctor tells you and stop making trouble." His voice carried no tenderness, no concern, only command. Regina's heart cracked open at that moment. She remembered every beating, every insult, every night she had cried herself to sleep, hoping one day he would love her again. Slowly, painfully, realization dawned in her eyes. "Henry," she said, tears rolling down her temples into her hair. "You don't want me to live, do you?" The room seemed to tilt as those words hung in the air. Tasha's hand flew to her mouth in shock, while Dr. Felix looked away, suddenly unable to meet Regina's gaze. Henry did not answer immediately, but his silence spoke louder than any confession. And in that silence, Regina finally understood that the man she loved had already buried her in his heart long before he brought her to this hospital. Regina's chest rose and fell rapidly as the truth settled into her bones like cold iron. She stared at Henry as if seeing him for the first time, not as a husband, not as the man who once held her hand under moonlight, but as a stranger who wished her dead. Her tears stopped flowing, not because the pain was gone, but because something stronger had taken its place. She slowly placed one trembling hand over her swollen belly and whispered, "If you don't want me to live, then I will live for this child." Her voice was weak, but every word carried fire. Tasha felt a surge of emotion rise in her chest as she watched Regina gather strength from a place deeper than fear. Dr. Felix shifted uncomfortably, the confidence he once wore like armor now cracking under the weight of that mother's gaze. Regina turned her face toward Tasha, her eyes pleading but fierce. "Please, save my baby. Even if I don't make it," she said softly. Tasha shook her head immediately, tears filling her eyes. "No, you both will live. I promise," she replied, gripping Regina's hand tightly. Henry scoffed, stepping back as if disgusted by their determination. "Enough drama," he said. "Doctor, finish what you started." But this time, Dr. Felix hesitated. The woman on the bed was no longer just a case, no longer just money. She was a living, breathing human being fighting for her life, and something about her refusal to give up began to shake the darkness in him. And in that fragile moment of hesitation, fate leaned closer, ready to change everything. Dr. Felix slowly removed his gloves, the sound of latex snapping in the tense silence echoing louder than it should have. He stared at Regina, then at Tasha, and finally at Henry, whose eyes burned with impatience. For the first time since Henry had offered him the money, doubt crept into the doctor's heart like an unwelcome guest. He had taken bribes before, turned blind eyes, bent rules. But killing a woman and her child with his own hands suddenly felt heavier than he had imagined. "Sir," Dr. Felix said carefully, "this woman is in critical condition. If we don't operate now, she might die anyway. And the baby too." Henry's face twisted in anger. "Then let her die," That's what I paid you for, he barked, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. Tasha gasped, and Regina's breath caught painfully in her throat as those words confirmed every fear she had buried deep inside her heart. Tasha stepped forward boldly, her voice shaking but firm. "You're asking him to murder your wife," she said, pointing at Henry. "Do you even hear yourself?" Henry laughed coldly. "Mind your business, nurse. This is between a husband and his doctor." Regina closed her eyes tightly as another contraction surged through her body. But this time, she did not scream. Instead, she spoke through clenched teeth. "Henry, if I die today, my blood will never leave your hands." Those words struck him harder than he expected, and for a brief moment, something like fear flickered across his face. Dr. Felix swallowed hard, sweat forming on his brow. The power in the room was shifting, no longer resting with the man holding the money, but with the woman who refused to die quietly. The air in the delivery room felt thick, heavy, as though even the walls were listening. Dr. Felix wiped his face with the back of his hand, his breath uneven now, his eyes no longer cold but troubled. He looked at Regina again, really looked at her. The blood on the sheets, the pain carved into her face, the way her hands still clung protectively to her belly despite everything. Something inside him shifted. "This is not what I signed up for," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Henry stepped forward sharply. "Don't start acting holy now," he snapped. "Take the money and do your job." He pulled out his phone, showing the transfer receipt, waving it like a weapon. "You've been paid." But money suddenly seemed small and dirty in that room, unable to silence the weight pressing on Dr. Felix's conscience. Tasha saw the change and seized it like a lifeline. "Doctor, you can still save them," she pleaded. "You took an oath. Don't let it end like this." Regina opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "Please." That single word trembled through the room like a fragile prayer. Dr. Felix closed his eyes for a long second, then opened them with a decision burning behind them. He turned to Henry and said quietly, "I will not kill your wife." Henry's face exploded with rage. "You think you can just change your mind?" he roared. But the doctor was no longer afraid. He moved toward the surgical table, calling out, "Prep the or now. We're doing an emergency operation." Tasha rushed out to alert the staff, her heart pounding with relief and urgency, while Regina let out a broken sob. Not of pain this time, but of hope. And in that moment, Henry realized he was losing control of the story he thought he had already written. Henry stood frozen as Dr. Felix's words sank into him like poison. "You will not kill my wife?" he repeated slowly, disbelief and fury twisting his features. In one sharp movement, he grabbed Dr. Felix by the collar. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" he hissed. "I can ruin you." Dr. Felix did not flinch. He gently but firmly pushed Henry's hand away. "And I can call security and the police right now," he replied calmly. "You tried to hire me to commit murder. Choose your next move carefully." The power had completely shifted now. The man who once held money like a weapon suddenly had nothing but threats that no longer carried weight. Regina watched this exchange with blurry eyes, barely able to believe what she was seeing. The same husband who once controlled her with fists and fear now standing powerless in the face of truth. Just then, 2 nurses and a hospital security guard rushed in, alerted by Tasha. Henry turned sharply, his face pale, sweat shining on his forehead. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly, forcing a fake smile. "My wife is in pain, emotions are high." But Tasha stepped forward, her voice steady. "This man tried to bribe the doctor to kill his wife," she said clearly. The words fell like stones into the room. Regina closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her face. Not just from pain, but from heartbreak. The guard moved closer to Henry, suspicion in his eyes. For the first time in a long time, Henry felt trapped, and fear crawled up his spine. Meanwhile, Dr. Felix turned back to Regina and spoke gently. "Hold on, Mrs. Brown. We're going to take you into surgery now." And as they began to wheel her away, Regina realized that though her body was breaking, Her spirit had finally broken free. The wheels of the hospital bed rattled softly as Regina was rushed through the narrow corridor toward the operating room, bright lights flashing above her like passing stars. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, each one a battle she fought with everything left in her. Tasha ran beside her, holding her hand tightly, whispering, "Stay with me, Regina, stay with me." Regina tried to respond, but her lips only trembled. In her fading strength, she could still hear the distant echoes of Henry's angry voice being restrained behind her. But those sounds were slipping farther away, like a bad dream she was finally waking from. Dr. Felix moved quickly now, barking instructions, his face set with determination. This time, there was no greed in his eyes, no darkness, only urgency to correct the wrong he had almost committed. Inside the operating room, the doors closed with a heavy thud, sealing Regina off from the chaos behind her and placing her directly into the hands of fate. As the anesthetic began to flow, her vision blurred, and she whispered one last prayer into the sterile air. "God, please let my baby live." Her heartbeat slowed, monitors beeping steadily as the team worked over her fragile body. Outside, Henry sat restrained by security, his head buried in his hands. Not in remorse, but in frustration that his plan had failed. And in that silent space between life and death, Regina hovered, her spirit refusing to let go, because somewhere inside her, a tiny heartbeat was still fighting too. The operating room hummed with controlled chaos. Dr. Felix and the surgical team moved with precision, every movement deliberate, every decision crucial. Regina's body was battered, weakened from months of abuse and exhaustion, yet her will to survive burned brighter than the fluorescent lights above. Tasha stayed close, holding her hand, murmuring encouragements, brushing back strands of sweat-soaked hair from her face. "You're strong, Regina. You can do this," she whispered. Regina's eyes fluttered open briefly, catching Tasha's gaze, and for a heartbeat, the world outside vanished. In that moment, it wasn't pain, it wasn't fear. It was the raw, unshakable determination of a mother refusing to lose her child. And then it happened. The first cries pierced the tension, a tiny, high-pitched sound that cut through the room like a beacon. Regina's eyes widened with shock and awe, tears mixing with sweat on her cheeks. My baby, she gasped, her voice weak but trembling with joy. Tasha clutched the infant, showing her mother, and Regina reached out instinctively, her hands shaking as they touched the soft, fragile skin. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the dread of the past hours melting into a fragile, triumphant relief. Even Dr. Felix, hardened and morally shaken, felt something shift inside him as he stepped back, letting life reclaim its victory. Outside, Henry's restrained anger and frustration were nothing compared to the triumph unfolding beyond the doors. Regina had survived, and so had her child inside the recovery room. Regina lay on the bed, exhausted but alive, the baby wrapped gently against her chest. Tasha adjusted the blanket, her eyes bright with unshed tears, smiling softly. "You did it, Regina. You both did it," she said, her voice trembling with relief. Henry sat in the waiting area, his hands cuffed, knuckles white, staring at the closed doors of the operating room as if trying to will them to open and reverse reality. Every scream, every shout he had imagined in his plan now turned against him, replaced by the faint cries of a newborn, proof that his control had failed. The security guards exchanged glances, tension crackling in the air, as Henry's facade of dominance crumbled. The man who once commanded Regina's life with fear now had nothing but his anger and humiliation. His phone buzzed constantly, calls from family, potential lovers, even his father, but he ignored them all, trapped in a new kind of helplessness he had never known. The power he thought he owned had evaporated in the sterile white walls of a hospital, leaving him exposed and empty. Regina touched her tiny child's head and whispered, "We survived, my love. You're safe now." The weight of months of abuse, fear, and hopelessness began to lift slightly, replaced by the fragile joy of survival. Even the hospital staff, who had witnessed every step of her ordeal, felt the triumph of life over cruelty. And somewhere in the shadows of that room, Henry's schemes lay shattered, powerless against the strength and determination of a woman who refused to be broken. The hospital corridor was quiet now, except for the soft cries of the newborn and the occasional footsteps of nurses checking on their patients. Henry had been escorted out under the watchful eyes of security, his anger simmering behind cold, dark eyes. But he no longer carried power, only shame and the looming consequences of his actions. Regina rested in her bed, her body bruised and battered, but for the first time in months, she felt a strange sense of peace. She held her baby close, feeling the steady warmth and heartbeat against her chest. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Tasha sat beside her, offering water and soft words of encouragement. "You did it, Regina. You survived him. And your baby survived too," she whispered. Regina nodded weakly, tears slipping down her face. But this time, they were tears of relief, of survival, and of triumph. Outside the room, the hospital staff quietly exchanged stories of the near tragedy that had almost occurred, shaken by the thought that money and cruelty had almost triumphed over life. Dr. Felix lingered for a moment by the door, staring at Regina and the infant, his conscience heavy with the weight of what he had almost done. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by a grim sense of responsibility. He had nearly allowed evil to prevail, but thanks to Tasha's courage and Regina's indomitable will, life had won. Regina, still fragile but growing stronger with every passing hour, whispered to her child, "No one can touch us now, we are safe." And in that small, quiet room, the first rays of hope began to pierce the darkness, promising a future that had seemed impossible just hours ago. Days passed, and Regina slowly regained her strength, each small movement a victory over the months of abuse that had tried to break her. The bruises on her body faded, but the memory of Henry's cruelty remained, sharp and unrelenting. Yet, as she held her baby, tiny fingers curling around hers, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not the kind Henry had wielded through fear and violence, but the power of survival, of love, and of determination. Tasha visited often, helping with the baby, listening patiently to Regina's whispered fears, and reminding her that she was no longer alone. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Tasha said gently. "You've survived the worst, and now you get to live for yourself and your baby." Regina's eyes shimmered with tears, not of pain, but of gratitude and quiet resolve. Even as she healed, the memory of Henry's betrayal remained a burning ember in her mind, fueling her courage. She began making plans, small ones at first, speaking to the authorities about his threats, ensuring her baby's safety, and slowly rebuilding the life he had tried to destroy. Every decision, every careful step, reminded her that she was no longer a prisoner. The hospital room, once a chamber of terror, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she had reclaimed a fragment of the life stolen from her. As she cradled her child, she whispered softly, "We are going to be okay. We are going to be free." For the first time in what felt like forever, hope wasn't just a fragile dream. It was real, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Weeks later, Regina returned home, not to the house filled with fear and bruises, but to a small, safe apartment she had rented with the help of Tasha and a kind neighbor. The walls were bare, the floors quiet, but it was hers, and for the first time, she could breathe without trembling. Henry's threats had lost their power. He was being investigated for the bribes and abuse, and law enforcement had already started building a case against him. Regina held her baby close, rocking gently, feeling the warmth and trust growing between them. Every laugh, every small coo, was a victory against the darkness that had haunted her for so long. She finally allowed herself to dream again, not of escaping Henry, but of creating a life filled with love, safety, and dignity. One afternoon, as she watched her baby sleep, Tasha sat beside her and smiled. "Look how far you've come, Regina. You fought, and you won," she said softly. Regina nodded, her fingers brushing over the child's tiny hand. "We did," she whispered. "He tried to break me, But he didn't know how strong I was. A sense of calm settled over her like a gentle tide, washing away the lingering fear. The scars on her body would fade, but the lessons of survival and courage would stay forever. In that quiet apartment, with sunlight spilling through the windows and her child asleep in her arms, Regina finally understood that life had not only given her a second chance, it had given her freedom. She would never let anyone take that away again. The morning sun streamed through the small apartment window, bathing the room in golden light. Regina sat on the couch, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of serenity she hadn't known existed. The weight of fear, pain, and betrayal had lifted, replaced by a quiet, steady strength. Outside, the city bustled with life, but inside this small sanctuary, she had created her own world. A world where she was safe, her child was safe, and no one could ever control or harm them again. Every breath she took reminded her that she had survived the worst, that she had reclaimed her life from the man who had tried to destroy it. Tasha visited one last time before moving on to her next shift, smiling at the scene before her. "You've come so far, Regina," she said softly. "Your story doesn't end with him. It begins with you now." Regina kissed her baby's forehead and whispered, "Yes, our story is just beginning." She looked out the window, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her face, and allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibilities. Love, laughter, and peace. No longer a victim, she was a mother, a survivor, and a woman who had taken her life back from the hands of cruelty. And in that quiet, radiant morning, Regina understood fully that every scar, every tear, every heartbeat of fear had led her to this moment, her new dawn.